Has either of you seen the Muji hut?
Huh, yep.
It's
That
amazing.
dream. That dream. Taking a Muji hut, putting it outside, remote area, mountains, and then that's it. I would probably need two of those.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty tiny, right?
yeah, it's only one room. But yeah, two of those would actually make a nice, small little getaway. I love that.
Yeah, major want for that one. I've had this dream of having like a little retreat at the end of my garden or in the
Mm.
forest for years,
Ooh,
but I've got a tiny garden, but I still am trying to like create this tiny little like place where I can go and write or do things like this. It's not happened yet, and I can't fit the Muji one, but it is beautiful.
it's really nice. And they even have a bigger, like, Muji house, I think it's called,
Yeah,
as a also very nice aesthetic. So yeah, as you can hear, we're gonna talk about Muji today. So welcome to the DMBA podcast, where we share business confidence with the design community. And this is a business design teardown, which means we have a look at the product or company that design community and designers love. And we try to see if it's fancy design only or is it fancy business as well, and kind of break down the strategy and the playbook of the company. And yeah, today we're tearing down Muji.
we are. And talking of fancy businesses and fancy design, I think this company, Muji, is really kind of anti-fancy. They've been known to say that they are anti-gorgeous. They're almost like
Yeah.
the absolute antithesis of like mass market luxury statement branded goods. So I think they'd be very proud to say we're definitely not fancy. Um, I know it's not necessarily what you
That's
meant
true.
by it, but yeah, this is about as anti-fancy as it gets. So Muji, start off with, either of you been to a Muji store before?
I'm sorry. I'm starting to get embarrassed because I'm always the one saying, I haven't heard about this company before researching this podcast. And it's true for Muji too. But in my defense, there is no Muji stores in Austria. So it's hard to stumble over one.
It is
There
true.
isn't one in Vienna?
No.
No, they
Wow,
haven't really got
okay.
that many in mainland Europe. They've got, I think, over half are in Japan, which is where this company started and where it thrived and still does. The rest are rest of the world, mostly in the Far East. Um, there's only a handful in the UK now. Alan, have you managed on your travels to visit a Muji store?
Yeah, so when I lived in Munich, I came across this gorgeous looking storefront. And I was like, oh, this looks like a place I should go inside and check out. And yeah, that's when I first learned about the store. And then I realized that the pens and notebooks that we are using in the office. So basically, there were two camps in the office. So either you were using the Moleskine notebook or you were using Muji's notebook. And there were people who loved their pens as well. I was never a fan of their pens, but notebooks are pretty nice. And then also when we moved to Berlin, I went to a store there, and I think this is the first time I tried their like food items, because up until visiting the Berlin store, I only kind of realized that they have kind of household items, but then trying Japanese packaged goods food is also an interesting experience. So I'm
Yeah,
definitely, let's call it a mini fan.
mini fan. Yeah,
Yeah, not like you know idolizing it, but yeah, it's nice. I like it.
it is nice. And those stores, there's over 1,000 of them now around the world, 7,000 items. They've really expanded over the years, from clothing and household goods to food, as you mentioned, Alan, particularly kind of unusual Japanese treats and things like that. Um, how many brands can either of you mention or think of that have created and sold fragrances, stationery, hotel rooms, cars, campsites, and even homes? Can you name any
Muji
that have been that diverse at all? I can't
campsite.
think of
I mean,
any
yeah,
that have ever gone that far, and that's what Muji have done since they were established in 1980. So fair to say that their brand proposition is still very much focused around the stores and household products. So things like clothing, bathroom accessories, bedding, sheeting, a lot more of the kind of food, kitchen kind of things. In a way, very similar to a kind of IKEA variety of products, but definitely with a more unified and pared back design aesthetic. So unlike an IKEA, where there's all kinds of styles to meet everyone, there is very much a Muji simplicity, which has been there since the 80s. And I think that's a very big part of their appeal, is there's a sort of timeless nature to it and an intentionality of kind of stripping things back. So if you've been to an IKEA and enjoyed the kind of design sensibility, the enormous range of items and the affordability, I think you'd probably enjoy Muji, but you'd have to kind of enjoy the pared back Japanese simplicity that goes with it. I'd say, for me, if you've not been to Muji before, they're probably one of the closest kind of comparisons where it's higher level design, but democratized and affordable. Do you think that's fair to say, if you were kind of summing up a sort of comparison brand?
Yeah, definitely. Sounds about right to me. It does. I mean, it's a very good point that you bring about, like, it has a very distinct look, whereas IKEA just needs to cater to more tastes, and Muji is, which is interesting because both of these brands have such a strong heritage. Like IKEA, even the colors, it's like, it's Scandinavia, it's Sweden, and Muji is Japanese. But IKEA, I think, just more globalized itself. The thing that's left is the names, and Muji has like distinct Japanese look. There's on their packaging, it's always Japanese description of the product, so you can't really know what it is actually if you can't speak Japanese. So I think Muji goes deeper into this like Japanese heritage than IKEA does with its Scandinavian heritage.
Definitely. And talking of heritage, you already mentioned established in 1980, and it was originally an in-store brand for a larger department store chain. And I know every episode I do a horrendous job of pronouncing things. This is going to be no different, probably worse than ever, and we won't have Franz to fall back on. Unless he's Japanese,
can't help in this
good. I don't know. So the department store that it was part of was called Seiyu. Someone in the comments tell us whether we're pronouncing these correctly or not, because I'm really sorry they're going to get butchered.
So say it again, Tom, just to torture you.
Well, I think it's Seiyu.
Seiyu.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. And there's some really fun names I'm going to try and pronounce now. So it's initiated as this sort of sub-brand for that department store by someone called Seiji Tsutsumi. I think that's right. And he was the head of the Seiyu retail group. And it came about as a response to the kind of consumerism and excess that was starting to come across from the West into Japan in the 1970s. It was really characterized by this sort of desire for high-end brands, fussy-looking products, and kind of paying too much probably for something that just had the same function as a basic product. So because it had some Western designer brand on it, it was a lot more expensive, and that had become very desirable. And this was very much an intentional movement away from that. And that philosophy, that ethos has continued to this day, thankfully. And I think it's part of what makes it strategically interesting, and what I think is one of the reasons that designers kind of, those of us that appreciate sort of democratic, utilitarian, accessible
minimal
design, minimal, really value in a brand like Muji. So yeah, it was aimed to sort of counter that trend by offering sort of simple quality products, but stripping away all that unnecessary costs associated with branding and advertising. So as Alan already mentioned, extremely light on any packaging. The sort of descriptions and instructions that come with these products is usually very, very lightweight. It might be wrapped in a tiny bit of card that really doesn't say much about it. But again, that speaks to this sort of simplicity and ease of use, that you should just understand how the product works and what it's for, rather than needing it kind of explained to you. Some products do that better than others, has to be said. And the name itself, Muji, comes from the longer original name, again, tricky one for me to pronounce, which was Muji Ryohen, which means, roughly translated, no brand quality goods. So that was shortened to Muji at some point. So really, I think that tells you all you need to know about the kind of ethos that this was established upon. And yeah, walk into a Muji store. I remember I went to my first Muji store probably 15 years ago. There used to be a big shopping centre, or there is a big shopping centre in Kent, which is sort of outskirts of London, called Blue Water. And that was where I first saw a Muji store, and it immediately caught my eye. Really, there was nothing similar to it at the time. There are lots of copycats now. But there was something kind of refreshing in its pared-back nature. And actually, it threw me a bit. The fact that there was very little brand there at all, very little in the way of instructions or packaging. It really, really stood out. Subsequently been lucky enough to go and visit the mega store, the kind of holy grail of Muji in Tokyo, which I have to say,
Really?
if you've ever been, if you get to go to Tokyo, go to the Muji store. It is just mind blowing. It's like 5 floors of, just like.
Go to the store and stay in their hotel.
And stay in the hotel. The hotel is the top 2 floors, which we'll get onto. But yeah,
You've been there?
I haven't stayed in the hotel. I wish I had, but I've been to the store, and it was incredible. I think a lot of the products that you get in the Japanese stores you don't get in the US or in Europe, and there's some mad shit. If you've been to Japan, you realise like consumerism is off the charts, but also the variety of products you can buy and the unusual stuff is just.
So what do you remember? Give us one example.
A lot of the food things that were in there were really quite unusual, but I mean, that's Japan in general. I don't want to kind of go down a rabbit hole of Japanese cuisine and how fascinating it is, because I could happily. But yeah, a lot of really interesting ingredients, a lot of really interesting kind of cookware things that I didn't see in the UK store. Saying that though, the UK store I've been to is very small compared to that one in Tokyo. It's enormous. So yeah, something like 7,000 products they have. I think a couple of the stores in the US are similar scale, but still don't have all of those products. Lots of clothing as well. A few more like traditional cuts on clothing that probably wouldn't translate so well in the West. But yeah, if you get the chance to go, absolutely. Could easily spend a few hours and a lot of yen in that place. I think the only things I bought were like, had to buy some of the pens because that's kind of one of the signature products. Alan, you already mentioned. Beautiful kind of gel ballpoints that have got some really interesting design features. But they have like just have the little Muji sticker on, and that's it. You basically take that off, and it's like this transparent gel pen. And I think to me that's the iconic one as a designer. That and the notepad. But they do have a lot of iconic designs across the range. Things like their diffusers, some of their cookware. So yeah, it's a fascinating place as a designer to go and hang out, which is why I love IKEA as well. Any excuse to go to IKEA. I don't know about either of you.
Just choose the right time.
Yes, choose the right
I love to go to IKEA, but do it on a weekday at 8 p.m.
Yeah. Do either of you have this where you're just like, if I haven't gone to IKEA for a couple of years, it's like I just want to go and see what new stuff they've come up with. There's always something interesting. There's always, I never come away empty-handed, but it's often not to go and buy, and I think you can have a similar experience in Muji. But am I the only design tourist who does that with IKEA? Let us know in the comments. But yeah, Alan Franz, are you the kind of person that would go into a Muji store or an IKEA store just to do that?
So there are exactly three kind of stores that I love to just walk through. Actually, four. I love my grocery shopping too, but I do that on a regular basis. But the things that I just like doing, even if I don't really do something, need something, is IKEA, like furniture. Then it's sports. So just any sport outlet, just having a look at what's in there. And the last one is DIY stores.
Oh man, yeah, I'm with
I
you.
really like it.
You're a
And
dude.
everything else, like, I don't know. It's hard. I don't enjoy shopping, but I think I would enjoy a Muji store.
Yeah.
Alan?
Definitely not the type that would go into IKEA just to check stuff. But I am a tourist. I think you use the word designer tourist, Tom. And it's funny you use this phrase because when I worked at IDEO, we had this. It was basically a document. So I believe each office actually prepared like a document for the visiting team. So if you would do research in China or Japan or US, you would travel to the city where the office is, and then the hospitality team would have this like a list of things that you should check out while there. And sometimes, often, or like all of these lists had stores on there. Or you should check out this, like in San Francisco, I remember it was maybe Converse, like how you can go in there and design your own shoe, whatever. And that's kind of a tourist that I am. So if I go somewhere, I do want to check this like flagship stores of the brands that I love. So I was actually in Tokyo, and I have to inform you that I kind of forgot about going into the store or to the hotel, and I'm really sad about that. So that's maybe for the next trip to Tokyo.
Any excuse to go back there. Yeah, definitely.
Tell me about it, yeah.
Just side note, if talking of stores that are design, maybe not design focused, but definitely an interesting retail experience, if you are lucky enough to go to Tokyo, is Tokyo Hands, which is another sort of department store that has like incredible stationery and lots of really interesting design-led products in there. So yeah, fascinating place to go. The home of Muji as well. And if I go back, I definitely want to do a night or two at the Muji Hotel. Which I'm going to wait for us to kind of get into in a little bit. Because yes, lots of household products, cookery. You can buy great food now from Muji, but yes, they have expanded in some really fascinating areas, which I'm just going to touch on because I think we're going to get into it in more detail when we talk about strategic moves. But now run 3 hotels, 2 in China, I believe, 1 in Japan, the one that's the top 2 floors of the building where the Muji flagship store is in Ginza. Also run campsites where you can go and stay, and like all the lodges are well designed and you can hire all the equipment. I mean, just a fascinating kind of way to expand out their ethos into other areas. They made a car in 2001 that was very short-lived, sort of very economical, small, minimalistic, didn't even have any branding on it. You know, again, they have this experimental mindset of what would the Muji approach to these different areas be? And some of them are with a view to that being a very profitable, sustainable, and maybe something business aspect they can grow, which I'm sure things like the hotels and the lodges hopefully will become. But there is also this kind of experimental, like, what if approach that maybe leads to other breakthroughs. So famously, their art director for, I think, 10, 15 years has been Ken Yahara. Like, absolutely incredible designer, definitely worth checking out some of his books. But he has kind of headed up Muji's art direction for a long time. And he talks about how they like to run these thought experiments of, like, what would the Muji of X be? You know, what would the Muji baseball team be like, was one of the quotes I saw. What would the sports facility look like? You know, I think that would be crossing the streams for Franz there. You know, what if we were to do sports equipment as well? So I think as a thought experiment, that's really interesting, and perhaps has led them to say, let's see what the Muji of these things would look like, and they've ended up becoming businesses, which is fascinating. I think as a designer, that's a really useful and thought-provoking exercise to go through. Maybe you work for a brand team, or maybe you work at an agency that has a particular way of doing things, and maybe that's just a good thought experiment or workshop to run with your team to be like, what would the X of us be if we to expand out? Because you just never know what interesting things might come off the back of that. So I loved that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
Yes, and there are 3 kind of key values that Muji from day one have tried to live, to be this kind of ultimate less is more global brand. 3 things. The first is selection of materials, which is ensuring that the material is appropriate for the product they're designing, but also as much as possible doesn't damage the environment, won't cause harm to the user, doesn't have any unnecessary processing as part of it, which is the second of their key values, which is the streamlining of processes. So a good example of this is the paper that they use to wrap their products and have the very minimal instructions they have. So they select a paper which is kind of recycled, low impact, and a process that usually recycled papers go through is it might be bleached to kind of improve the look of the color to be more consistent. Muji
More
looked
white,
and said,
basically.
yes, yeah, to make it white. Muji looked at that and was like, is that going to improve the functionality of the product? Is it going to be detrimental to the user, which I'll come back to that terminology in a second? And the answer to both of these was no. There was absolutely no need to go through this process. It made it cheaper for the consumer because there was no bleaching involved, no chemicals involved, so it's more environmentally friendly. So when you see the paper at Muji, it has this kind of tint to it where you think it looks a little rougher, doesn't look as consistent across every product, but that's intentional. I think there's something to be admired about that, and it's definitely a hallmark of how they do things. And the third of their key values is simplification of packages. So packages being not just packaging. So we've already mentioned that there's this very minimal like cardboard packaging that goes around a lot of their products, or very light cellophane, which I'm sure they'll move away from. But the simplification of the package itself as in the product. So how can we scale this down and make it much, much simpler? If you are not familiar with Muji's products, and I always say this, a quick Google of some of their homewares, things like lamps or cleaning materials, things like that.
The
broom, right? It's an absolute masterclass in simplicity.
Yeah.
Everything is the same color. Everything's the same material. There's no branding on there. There's no like click here things, anything like that. They sort of go into the background in the home, which is a massive part of their sort of philosophy. So yeah, those are the kind of 3 key values that they try and live by. Franz, you've mentioned the broom. I'm sure we've all had a little look at some of Muji's products as part of this research. Any that either of you really are coveting now that maybe really caught your eye and thought, yeah, I can see that in my home?
If it was 2005, the CD player.
Expand on that, Franz, because I know the one you're talking about.
It's because it's a beauty. Like it looks like a lamp that you would mount on a wall. So it's just a square. It's white. There's a CD in the middle, and it has a string attached. You pull the string, music plays. Done.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. Yeah.
It's all just one little box. You can see the CD going around. They're not trying to hide that. And you just pull a string to start, pull a string to stop. Beautiful.
It's beautiful, right?
Really beautiful.
It's just, I mean, I maybe own some CDs in some box in some basement that I have spread my stuff around. But yeah, obviously not very useful anymore. But I like the product. It's just nice.
Alan, anything that caught your eye?
Nothing I would buy right now, but it's just I really love the aesthetic of their like bedding. Like when you're in the store, but also when you look at their photos online, just like the way that the sheets go over the bed. It just makes it look so soft and fluffy, and just like you just want to go in there and hope for a very cold winter night and just cover yourself in the sheets. So yeah, it has a really really nice look. Yeah, so that was the thing that caught my mind the most. In addition to stationery, of course, that always looks very, very nice.
Yeah, the stationery for me is always the killer. Easy way to spend a few quid without thinking about it. And you're right, there is a sort of coziness to the homewares and the clothing. Actually, the clothing's really caught my eye. I think I might be getting an order in of some of their sort of minimal stuff. So yeah, it looks interesting.
These episodes are costing us a lot of money, right? So man. Every time
thankfully with Muji, it's pretty affordable.
Reasonable.
Reasonable, yeah. When I look back at some of the brands we've talked about, unsurprisingly, when you're talking about design and especially high-end design, there tends to be a lot more luxury or slightly less affordable brands in there. But I think Muji strikes a balance of being minimal, thoughtfully designed, but actually quite affordable. Maybe not quite IKEA pricing, but not far off. It has to be said. I was looking at some clothing. It's like $35 for some trousers. Some of their stationery is like $3 for a pen. Some of their storage containers are probably a little cheaper or comparable with the IKEA. So that's the price point we're talking about here. And I think if you saw them out of context, if you didn't realize they were Muji and you saw a photo of them, you could quite easily anchor to much more expensive products that you might have seen in more niche or bougie stores.
Muji.
Bougie Muji. So yes, talking of design, I'm going to quickly rattle through 10, which is quite a few, 10 reasons why I think designers love Muji. And chaps, please jump in if you feel you have to. Mainly to stop me waffling on.
Tom, you need to sell this better. I'm going to talk about 10 things designers love Muji for, and you're going to love number 7, right?
You're going to love number 7. Keep lifting to number 7. We might come up with another 7. 11. So number 1, that minimalist aesthetic. The Muji emphasize that simplicity. Clean lines, neutral colors, no superfluous detail. And that really means that these products have a real longevity. I've read kind of interviews with the heads of design and kind of retail heads saying, if you bought a Muji site storage solution 10 years ago, you can still go into the store now and buy a new drawer for it. It's going to fit. It's going to look exactly the same because it's designed with that timeless simplicity there. So big fan of that. And then there's the functionality side of things. I think more than any kind of big brand, and I include IKEA in this, there is an absolute focus on user centricity that you do not see at this price point very often. They do an awful lot of research in people's homes, ethnographic work that user-centered designers and service designers should really admire. And that is with this functional first approach when it comes to designing products. So trying to ensure that they're streamlining how people are going to use these in their homes. I don't think you see quite the attention to detail that Muji have when it comes to designing mass market products. And they refer to the people who end up buying their products in their literature, internal and external, not as customers or consumers, but as users. And I think that's a really key kind of component of their ethos that I admire enormously. Number 3 is that unbranded nature, which is really rare in the sort of modern consumer world. And again, it allows the design and the functionality to take center stage without distraction. Next thing is quality materials. Despite the fact they're like mega affordable, they're often made with high quality materials that have been selected with care. And the fact that they use a lot of the same materials across a lot of their products probably gives them some economies of scale that allows them to use maybe a higher quality product across more of their range, which is super interesting. We already said one of their pillars is material selection is like priority one. Next thing is sustainability. We've already talked about the fact that they make a lot of packaging and material choices to be as sustainable and eco-conscious as possible, but that also extends to their processes. And that's become something that companies have focused on maybe more and more in the last decade, but that's been central to Muji since day one. Not wanting to get caught up in this sort of fast fashion Western brand philosophy that was around in the 70s and has continued in a lot of areas. So they've been there long time, OG, a brand on the sustainability front, and having it so central to what makes them special and interesting. Next is the versatility. Because they're so simple, their products can seamlessly fit into a variety of environments, which is really interesting, from like traditional homes to modern homes and offices. I don't think you get that even with something like IKEA, where they try and have lots and lots of different styles and almost encouraging you to maybe change your styles every few years. Muji have a definite minimalism that means you could keep that product for a very long time and probably fit it into different contexts. I could absolutely imagine some of their products working how I had my house designed 5-10 years ago and in 10 years from now, and that's very appealing. And I could go and buy the same product if I like it in 5 and 10 years and know it's still going to be on the shelf in Muji. Number 7 is their philosophy in general. This philosophy of no brand quality goods. It kind of challenges that conventional consumerist mindset. Instead of promoting that excessive consumption, it encourages people to be thoughtful and mindful with their purchasing, which for me as a designer resonates enormously, and increasingly is something that resonates with myself, and I know a lot of people in the design community. Next thing is affordability. For the quality and the design on offer, I think Muji products are incredibly reasonably priced, and we've already touched on that. And that makes good design, a bit like IKEA again, accessible to more people. And we've talked before about impact. As a designer, if I can get good design into the hands of more people, that's great for me. It's not exclusive. And I've already mentioned you could see these kind of designs being in a more exclusive place if you didn't know they were Muji. But no, you can go and pick this stuff up at a very reasonable price. Final things are innovation. They introduce products that address everyday problems in really clever ways, and I find that very inspiring as a designer. Things like I'm not going to go into detail now. Go and check out the way that they design some of their cleaning products, for example. Franz has already mentioned the CD player that kind of lives on your wall, so it takes up a bit less space and has this very, very simple mechanism that I'd never seen a CD player designed in that way before. And it's not just a novelty, like I can imagine using it in that way. So yeah, very clever, very interesting ways of rethinking everyday objects. And then finally, there is this holistic experience. We talked in a couple of episodes ago about how Aesop have this sort of unique store design to each of their stores, but Muji don't have that. They do have a more, I'd say, design system approach. Like every store is pretty recognizable, but there is a sort of calming, organized and pleasant experience to navigate the stores, which I think is reflected in the products as well. That ethos seems to be extended to the people who work there and the in-store experience, which I really appreciate. So yeah, for me, the appeal of Muji can be summed up as this sort of intersection of simplicity, functionality and thoughtfulness, and the sort of consistent commitment they've made to those 3 pillars we talked about earlier. So yeah, big Muji fan. I think it goes without saying.
Yeah.
Do you think I've missed anything,
sure,
chaps, on the sort of reasons that Muji might appeal to designers who listen to this podcast?
Nothing comes to mind.
Good.
No.
Maybe great business.
Great business.
Yeah, we hear about that later.
Indeed.
What's interesting to me is that the founding, this philosophy was there from the very, very start, right? So this being founded in the 80s at a time in Japan where you had this notion of desirable is a brand, and brands are the things that actually draw people towards them. That's super interesting thing to counter that, especially when I read up a little bit on this, and this at the point in time was actually a real gap, because the whole market in Japan apparently in the 1970s went into the direction of sometimes it's called the hourglass shape, right? So you have the very expensive branded products, but then on the other hand, you have the very cheap, very bad quality products. And when Muji was actually founded from Seiyu, they saw this first economic wave that Japan was riding a little bit calming down. And then when consumers when users, in Muji's words, became more conscious about how they spend their money, there wasn't really an alternative that was good, because cheap products were just not good. They were really, really bad quality. And getting into this in-between ground of no brand quality goods was something that was very novel at this point in time. And that's why I found this super interesting founding story, just in general, to go into a place in the market that was just not occupied by anyone at this point in time.
It seems to be a running pattern and a theme for all of these like successful companies, is like you identify basically where everyone is headed, and then identify the gap which this trend has created. In this case, it's exactly as you said, Franz. It's a need for this like affordable but good quality products.
Yeah.
Did you hear about some people referring to Muji as Spartan luxury?
Yeah, I read that.
I like that.
That's interesting. I think when they started, that wasn't the case. When they started, it was really simple, functional, good products with reasonable pricing. And only when this philosophy or lifestyle became more widespread, it became actually the Spartan luxury. But I'm going to get there in a second, because what I want to do today is basically do things a little bit different than we usually did it when we talked about strategy. What I would usually do is walk you through core strategic decisions of the or core changes of the company, events of the company in a chronological order, and then also explain the strategic significance of these decisions and changes. But this time, I'd rather give you a chronological order first, and then talk about the strategy, and you'll realize why I do this later. Again, Tom already mentioned a lot of things that happened, but I'm still gonna go through the order of events, because I think I got some more and some other stuff that happened in the course of the company history. As we said, founded in 1980s by this retail group as a in-house brand. So they didn't have own shops. It was just a brand in another supermarket. Then they opened 3 years later their first store, and then became an own company in 1989. So they saw that it was super successful, and they founded the Ryohin Kaikaku Company Ltd. Again, not certain if this is pronounced that way. So they established this company that handled from this point on every step from planning products, development, manufacturing of goods, and distribution and sale. What's important to know is that Muji does not manufacture in-house. They barely manufacture in-house. They primarily rely on a network of third-party supplier. They do closely work together with these manufacturers, so to ensure that the quality is met and the design standards are met. But what they really focus on from the very start is product development, design, marketing, and we'll talk about this later, and sales. So this is the core of this company, not production, but really product development, design, marketing, and sales. 1991, and that's going to continue like this. I'm just going to give you, years and what happened in this year. So 1991, first store in London. Actually, their first international store was opened in London, and from this point in time, they continued internationalization. 2001, Muji actually, for the first time, struggled big times. So especially in Japan, they had a little bit of a too aggressive expansion strategy. And that's really tricky with this brick and mortar shop concept, retail concept that they have, because it's linked to a lot of fixed cost. And that basically almost killed them. And after that, things got a bit wild. Actually, this is exactly when diversification started, and exactly what Tom pointed out. So bear with me, 1995, Muji Campsite was established. So retail company, 1995, deciding to do a Muji Campsite. Now there are 3 of them to date. Then 1996, they opened a flower shop. 2001, Muji Car, limited edition, 1,000 cars together with Nissan. Depending on where you live, you know this car actually under the name Nissan Micra or Nissan March.
Oh, I
And
thought
the
it
Muji
looked
car.
slightly familiar, the shape. Okay. So did they just take a Micra and like Mujify it? Is that basically
Exactly.
what happened? Right.
That's exactly what they did.
They just took the feature out and make it more simple. And they only use one color, so you can only buy it in so-called marble white. So it's not white, it's marble white.
Yeah. And again, remember Tom's story about paper not being bleached, so it's not super white? That color comes back in the Muji car, right? It's not super white, it's just whitish, something like it's a little not very white. But as you said, Alan, it's the most basic version, most basic specification of the Nissan March. Only one color and no badge. So on this car, there is no Nissan badge, no Muji badge. It's just a white, very basic, small car. 2004, Muji House. Prefabricated houses, also huts.
Yes.
Very nice website. It's unfortunately only in Japanese. There's still like use Chrome, translated it. It's very nice.
And what do they run at?
Yeah.
Like 20, the equivalent of about $20,000, something like that, US?
The hut?
The hut.
I think hut, yeah,
Yeah.
but the house is around 120K.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the house is proper, right? It's
Yes.
not
Yeah.
a hut. It's a 2-story. So
No,
they have 4 different houses. The one, a smaller
Okay.
one, until they call it vertical. So it's actually 3 or 4 stories designed for a very small plot. So it's actually 4 different specifications. Super nice.
It's
I-
interesting.
Yeah, but I think this is only available in in Japan, right?
Yes.
The houses, because
Exactly.
It is, yeah, and I think there's a culture in Japan of you like buying a home and then rebuilding it like every few decades, which isn't terribly sustainable. So apparently, like the market for a prefabricated house that fits these plots is pretty big, probably bigger than it would be outside there. But they're actually trying to make it something that would last a lot longer as well. So they've really thought about the longevity.
Yeah.
Rather than just rebuilding it in 30 or 40 years. Admirable stuff. I want one.
So 2010's diversification race continues. Muji Cafes and Meals, restaurant chain. 2018, first Muji Hotel in Shanghai, now also in Tokyo. 2020, subscription for home furnishing. So you don't buy their furniture, you rent their furniture. Also 2020, the US branch of the company files for bankruptcy. Not an exit, they're still in the US, but they struggled big times. And again, I'm talking about it a little later. At the end of August 2022, that was the latest number that I could find. Muji operates 530-ish stores in Japan, 600-ish stores outside of Japan in 32 countries with 7,000 products. So that's a lot. It's not maybe the biggest range ever, but it's a lot of different products. Until then, Muji products were almost exclusively sold in their own stores and in their online shop, but also in 2022, Muji products are now available for purchase in Lawson stores all over Japan, and Lawson is also kind of a corner store, as I understood it. So
yeah, like a 7-Eleven.
it's not like exactly 7-Eleven. So also very basic. And yeah, for the first time, they're really rolling out sales to third-party companies. Okay, so that was the fast track. A lot of this was already mentioned, but again, a huge variety, right? One company coming from retail, in itself having a broad range of products, but not even that, but also different portfolio of companies, right? So question is, how does this all fit together? Like, why are you doing this, Muji? So, well, the interesting thing to me here was that the Muji of the 80s with the Muji of now is on the one hand very different, right? Super diversified, fully internationalized, but at the same time, it's exactly the same when it comes to the core value proposition. No brand quality goods. Like the thing that you read on the website, original, let's say marketing slogan was lower priced for a reason. Muji, the name no brand quality goods, was there from the very start, and they are still doubling down on this. So it's very, very much the same approach over now, what is it, more than 40 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, let's look at first the core business to understand that. So they stay true over the more than 40 years to their philosophy on the, let's say, mostly cost side. Exactly what you said: selection of materials, streamlining processes, simplification of packages. But as importantly, they also stay true to this philosophy on the value proposition side when they develop products. And the core principle here was always the simplicity, right? Simplicity not for the sake of it, but as a result of removing the unnecessary additions. So if you still haven't done so, listening to this podcast, pause real quick and have a look at the Muji online store. And you will feel like the first thing is that Muji, they only sell necessities, right? So it's pens, storage boxes, linen, brooms, candles, furniture. It does not really get more interesting than that, right? The most interesting things are maybe their electronics like fans and CD players. But you can argue that in non-European countries, even this is a necessity, right? So first, this simplicity already starts in their product line. There is no fancy stuff that they are actually selling when it comes to their core business, the Muji stores. And even the design of these necessities is simple, as Tom said, right? Everything is kept in natural colors. The design is timeless. The goal is always, and here I'm quoting, removing the minor inconveniences that occur on a daily basis when using these products. And if you have this in the core when you design a product, then you will eventually arrive at the most basic specification of something that just serves the purpose. And that's what they are aiming for, right? And this is why, and we talked about this even before we started this podcast, because this resonates a lot with me personally. They're aiming for this will do. So it's not about, hey, this is exactly what I want, I really need this. It's more about, okay, that's exactly the thing. This will do. Not more, not less. And they're aiming for this rational level of satisfaction. This really basic thing of, okay, yeah, that's the job. That's good.
I think this is the first brand we've worked on where that's really hit into Fran's sweet spot. Before, like you said, before we were recording, he had a grin on his face and was like, I like these guys.
Yeah.
I really loved Aesop. Sorry, go on.
No, I just wanted to confirm Tom's thoughts because I think you wrote to me, Franz, a day before we recorded or something, like, oh, I really am loving the research this time.
Yeah. The thing is, I already love the Aesop brand, right? But it's not exactly my cup of tea to buy a soap for 35 euros. But this like beautiful, minimalistic, simplistic things that are reasonably priced and just hunt my rational sense of satisfaction, that's just what Muji does and what I'm really fascinated by. And yeah, eventually and at the end, they have these products and none of their products are branded. No logos at all. And again, I'm quoting, if you take off the price tag, there is no indication that the product is from Muji, coming from a Muji executive, right? This is a strategic decision. Take the label off. If nobody knows Muji, nobody will ever know where you have this product from. But when they touch it, try it, see it, everybody will be like, there is something. It's something special.
It's interesting because there's a lot of parallels with Aesop, but one is super premium and the other one is like super affordable, because Aesop has this non-marketing approach, and Muji has this non-branding approach.
Yeah.
Both in the end want to achieve the same thing, which is word of mouth, through having a superior product or experience. But they just try to play a different game. So not invest in marketing, but rather invest even more into design to make something that's worth talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think
similar to, sorry, Tom, go on.
I was just going to say the restraint is the big thing there in the design, and I think a lot of brands, Aesop, you can still recognize the brown bottle and the typography, and it sends a signal. I think when that's in your home, that Muji doesn't. That's where it's very different. And I think an example of them absolutely sticking to that ethos admirably is the fact that they have collaborated on designs for some of their products with some proper high-end, very desirable design names, many of them unpronounceable to me. But they absolutely insist on not mentioning the names of those designers at all in their marketing or on the products, and just let the products speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And can you imagine a Western brand resisting, saying, we've got this like sick collaboration, like they charge you more for it?
Eames chair.
Yeah. At the extreme end of the spectrum,
Muji.
an Eames chair. But if like H&M do a collaboration with Stella McCartney or something like that, that's going to sell out quickly. They're going to market the shit out of it. They're going to charge us, 20-30% premium. Muji are doing that, but they're being so classy, in my opinion, and sticking to their guns.
Yeah, it is a hard decision to make. And I think you see the results over a long period of time. You don't see like this short-term spike in sales. But if you do it the right way, you can just build this story that just keeps going on for decades and decades. And that's what Japanese brands and companies are good at. Much better than the Western are.
Yeah. Okay, so this was now, let's say, a decision for strategic coherence over 45 years when it comes to their core business. But then we also talked about their diversified portfolio, right? And it turns out that every single decision and the way it's executed shows that they follow the exact same approach, right? As you said, it's like Mujifying something that's not in their core business. How would a Muji version of this look like? And that's just a few examples. I'm not going to go through every single diversified product, but Campsite, very weird first step to diversify as a company, because it's definitely not a great business. But again, it's about escaping the city, and it's about returning to and valuing the basics of life and connecting with nature. And again, this rational satisfaction of that's enough. That's the basics. Or hotels. Hotels is the biggest example for a market that went completely into this hourglass shape, right? If you look at the hotel landscape, you have either one strategic group that competes over stars and luxury, and then on the other hand, you have no frills hotels, very basic, not great, but very cheap. And Muji just disagreed with this industry structure and have their new concept, which is called anti-cheap and anti-gorgeous. So yeah, we are not cheap, but we're also not luxury. We are in the middle. We're good quality, no brand, Muji Hotel. Same thing, cafe and meals. And I'm quoting from the website, the aim is to cook as simply as possible to bring out the ingredients' natural taste, which are full of blessings from the sun, soil, and water. Obviously, marketing language, but again, trying to cook as simply as possible. Muji House, I need to quote again, more than 7,000 items of household goods and household goods handled by Muji are the basics of our life. So they talk about the stores, right? The Muji House is an extension of that, and it's the largest household product.
Wow.
How cool is that?
Super cool, man. Yeah. And it just seems to, they seem to stick to their guns so well in all of these things that they diversify into. And from a design perspective, something I learned in the research is that the process they have resists technology for its own sake. And they still prototype all their designs, including the house, including all their household stuff, on paper rather than computer, because that encourages the lack of unnecessary detail, right? If you're just designing by hand, you're going to keep things really simplified. And again, I just love that, particularly as a designer who tends to start on paper and loves that part of the process. So yeah, that really spoke to me.
That's true. Okay, so we now talked about their coherence of strategic decisions. It's within their product range of their core business, but also within this huge diversified portfolio. And through this strategic focus and very clear direction, they are able to do, in my opinion, two very interesting stretches. The first stretch is what started out as a relentlessly product-focused company. So they just had a bunch of products that they tried to make more simple. It has become more a lifestyle-focused company. So they cater not really for one product category, they cater much more to a, let's say, life of simplicity. They even have a name for this, Kenketsu. So life of simplicity. And yeah, Muji just tries to understand the needs of people who want to live a life like this, and then try to create products that go into this niche of simplicity, functionality, and minimalism. And it also kind of enables the second stretch, which is this thing of no brand approach, which is actually the brand approach. So let's not be kidding ourselves. Muji obviously wants us to recognize their brand, and the way they do this is by really focusing on absolutely no branding, just similar to Aesop not doing marketing, but still wanting to be very recognizable with all their bottles. Muji goes into not having any branding on their products, and this is exactly why a lot of people talk about it, and exactly why a lot of people like the brand, the one that they try to hide so much on the surface level, right?
And here's another parallel with Aesop. Like, if you decide to go with the non-marketing, non-branding approach, the way to still do marketing is by having retail presence. And both of these companies, we talked about Aesop in 2 episodes back, their whole thing was, hey, we need to become retail first for more people to learn about us. And Muji is doing the same thing. Basically, their marketing is opening stores around the world in the cities. Are you going to talk more about that? If not, I have one more thing I found in the annual report about their marketing approach.
Give it to us.
So the thing I found was, and it makes a lot of sense if you think about it, like, okay, we don't do marketing, but the way we will convey our values and the way we will, quote unquote, do marketing is by not talking about products, but by talking about Muji values and Muji concept. So we don't talk about specific products, we only talk about the company and our approach. And then you should trust us that each product is done this specific way. However, what has happened now is that they are trying to have a new approach where they have identified which are the best selling products, and they try to go and promote those products a little bit more by placing them in a store differently, by communicating the values a little bit more. Because the thing they have learned actually is that by only communicating the overall concept and not the product, there were certain products that their fan base loved, but some didn't even notice that they existed. So, they didn't really leverage the hits, which is what every company wants to do. If you have a hit, if you have an iPhone, you want everyone to learn about the iPhone. And obviously Muji has the pens, and the pens are well positioned in every store, but they had other hits that you walking into a store, you wouldn't know it's a hit. And maybe, Tom, you were also in a store, and I was as well. Like, the feeling you get when you're in a store is like all the products are equal. You don't have a feeling that there is something that's more important than the other. But now apparently they're making a change with that, trying to have those like, hey, I want to highlight this type of product.
Yeah. I mean, just in general, for all these brands that play on values, it's very important that at some point in time, you need to understand and, in the best case, experience the brand, right? Because if you're not able to buy into the philosophy of such a brand, yeah, maybe the product hits you because you like it from a aesthetical perspective, but it's not like you're not going to get a fan just by the product. You need to kind of experience and understand the philosophy behind that. And stores definitely are the huge factor also for Muji. And that's why their recent decision to also sell stuff in the Lansing stores is so interesting to me. Because it gives me a sense of they're having distribution problems maybe, or they're having cost problems in terms of opening new stores. It's just too expensive way to grow. But I'm gonna keep that for
I'll tell
later.
you more about it as well.
Thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if this is let's just do it, because I want to get a little bit geeky and discuss this from a management perspective. Why does this no brand, quality goods, reasonable priced, why does this even work? So on the one hand, you could argue that Muji's approach follows the blue ocean strategy logic, right? So blue ocean means you eliminate an investment factor that is a dominant in the industry and use that money to save and create a unique value for customers elsewhere. Like most prominent example for is Southwest Airlines at the time when there was no frills airlines. It was a completely new approach. They eliminate complexity and also comfort from air travel, and they reach the lowest possible price. And there are more examples like this. So you could argue that this is taking away branding, investing it somewhere else, is a blue ocean strategy. But what usually happens, and here, correct me if I'm happy to be challenged on this thought. We didn't discuss this before. But usually what happens with blue ocean is that they still either go into no frills and cost leadership, or they go into diversification and being a more premium product. Maybe not the most premium, but still something that's on the higher end of the spectrum. So yes, you could argue that this is blue ocean, but on the other hand, the direction that they are going, no brand, quality, reasonable pricing, is the one that you as a company actually want to avoid at all cost, because it's the stuck in the middle. Like, it's not the best product, but it's also not the worst. It's not the cheapest, but it's also not premium. It's just reasonable. And it's fascinating that this approach that has barely ever worked apparently kind of works for Muji.
I'll tell you more about that very soon.
I mean, but maybe they're not the most important. maybe they're not the most profitable company, right? But still, 45 years as a company is impressive. With the strategy that every management book will tell you, don't go there, don't be in the middle.
Yeah, I mean the amount of times we use today, like, hey, we want to be like affordable and high quality, and so like be in between is, you never want to like mention this as many times as we did today when talking about strategy, because usually want to go for either low cost or premium. I think there are always exceptions, but yeah, we'll talk about it.
I'm sure we'll get into it. I would say the only thing I would challenge is the low quality, because yes, materials wise, potentially not the highest quality in the world, but design wise, the quality is extremely high, I think, compared to comparable things at this price point. But we'll save some of that for later.
No, that's an interesting point. So maybe the way to see Muji is not as like, if we have this spectrum from affordable or let's say even cheap to premium, within the segment of cheap, Muji is the leader of like being the differentiated company, being the premium within the cheap ones.
Yeah.
You know? So maybe it's not even stuck in between. Maybe it's like the premium of
or
the
the
cheap
affordable luxury. What you said already in the beginning, right?
Maybe.
So again, but it's nothing, right? It's somewhere in the middle. So we can't do, so it could be the premium of the low cost, or it could be the cheap of the premium, but it's like, yeah. But I'm looking forward how this plays out in the financial side. I just want to say that it doesn't play out well everywhere, right? It doesn't work everywhere, and there are challenges with this exact approach, especially in international markets. Like, not everywhere in the world people buy into this enough is enough philosophy. Some markets perfectly function with this hourglass shape of premium and low cost. And if you pair this with challenges of international trade and like tariffs and shipping costs that inflate your prices, and all of a sudden you're not as reasonably priced anymore, then you get exactly what happened in the US with Muji in 2021. So we already said that this is the whole US branch of Muji went bankrupt in 2021. In addition to pandemic, well, furniture products were not well adjusted to the US market. They were kind of too small for US homes. The anti-consumerism philosophy did not work as well, or they didn't tell the story as well. You make the decision what's true here. Having higher prices due to tariffs and shipping costs, that combined with like a very strong competition in the US of in-house cheap brands, and all of a sudden you don't have a space anymore in a country, because that's still very narrow, right? And all of a sudden Muji was just a generic item that was maybe a little bit more beautiful, but if you didn't buy the story, then you could get things for cheaper that also worked, and all of a sudden this middle ground in the hourglass didn't exist anymore for Muji in the US. As we said, they're not leaving the market. They're still in there. This bankruptcy was more an effort to restart and restructure, but it's interesting that maybe it can't be IKEA, right? Maybe this strategy that they are so focused on cannot be rolled out to any country in the world.
Yeah, and we can have a look at the number of stores around the globe just to get a feeling for, I wouldn't say this is the feeling for how and where the company is currently big, but also to get a feeling for where the concept stuck and where the concept really worked, where this story and this heritage and this whole idea just flies well. So obviously the company has more than 500 stores in Japan, and then it has 400 plus something stores also in East Asia. And then if you just look at North America and Europe, this number is almost like just 20 to 30 stores, almost nothing. So you can see that there is this concept and this strategy works really well in Asia, but it doesn't seem to be working as well elsewhere.
Yeah. And again, I think the last bit that I mentioned with this decision to sell stuff also in Lawson stores, that until this point in time, I thought they would be quite successful. But then when I saw this, that they will also sell in Lawson stores in their core market in Japan, it made me really suspicious. Because if you have a brand recognition, then you can do this, right? You can have your products in a different store because you don't need the whole experience of selling in your own store. And that's maybe why it works in Japan, because it's so well known as a brand, Muji. But at the same time, if it's not well known and it is in a third-party store, you do not have the control over the experience, and it's just going to be a very basic product that is still more expensive than the cheaper products in this store. And yeah, I was kind of concerned about this decision and thought whether it would be whether distribution problems would be a link to that.
Have they tried doing that in other markets, the sort of convenience store thing, or is that just in Japan and Lawson's?
I didn't read about any third-party selling.
I can see it.
I think especially if you open stores in a market that you're not known in, then you kind of need this control over the experience. Also, if you're not doing a lot of marketing, right? So somewhere people need to be able to get to know you and buy into the brand story. And if it's not your store, and if it's not the very big brand, and if it's not the very big marketing, then there is nothing left.
Yeah, I guess given that, although it's kind of weird that they're selling them in those stores, I personally wouldn't see it as so much of an issue. It might be a red flag for some other distribution problems that you've already mentioned about, but I don't know. I really like it because I think of Muji in this sort of democratic, accessible brand, and in Japan people understand that, and I see that in Lawson's as well. It's like it's the every person corner store.
Could be.
Yeah.
If their recognition is big enough, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Because and also the convenience stores in Japan are weirdly a little more elevated, I think, than 7-Eleven in Japan is different gravy to 7-Eleven in the States.
It's like McDonald's in Europe versus McDonald's in the US.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So I think we should have a look at the numbers now, because I think we teased through strategy also, they seem to be doing well, but are they? So let's maybe just try to tell the story by having a look at the top level numbers. And I'll just start with the revenue. So in terms of the total revenue of the company in 2022, it was $3.3 billion US. And can you take a guess? Maybe it's not the best game, but what percentage of that revenue comes from Japan?
70%.
Bruns?
Second guessing is always the worst. I say 69.
Yeah, I mean, I was just surprised to learn that it was more than 50%. So it's not 70, it's not 69, it's 53. But still, being a company with 3.3 billion US dollars in revenue and having 50% in domestic market, it just tells us how how domestic this brand is, how strong it is in Japan versus elsewhere. And compared to some other Japanese brands, I don't think they were as successful in taking that leap. And maybe it's this whole concept of brandless product that is just hard to do in a country where you don't have this heritage and you don't have this initial story of why this thing worked in the beginning. So 50% of revenue comes from Japan, then another 34% comes from East Asia, most of that is China, and then only 5% is Europe and North America. Very,
Combined.
very rarely 5. Very, very rarely in an annual report do you find Europe and North America bundled together in the revenue,
Wow.
in the
Yeah.
revenue numbers, right? It's like Europe is 10%, America is, I don't know, 15, but here it's like 5% combined. And I was surprised by that. And then the rest is Southeast Asia and Oceania, so that's 7%. Next thing, I wanted to have a look at what percentage of this 3.3 billion comes from different type of products. And there are 4 big categories. And let's start with the smallest one. So do you know what percentage comes from the hotel, houses, cafes, and the campsite?
All together. Franz, you should guess first this time.
Yeah.
3.
I was going to say 5%.
Okay. It's 4. So very, very good
Hey.
guesses. Yes. So yeah, it's interesting because we talked a lot about diversification, but in reality, you know, there's house, hotel, cafe, and other things. They are basically just things that help, I think, tell the story of the brand better, but it should ideally still lead in more sales for their biggest categories of products, which are as following: food, apparel, and household. So food is 12%. So this is packaged food. I don't know, they have like chips, and you can buy tea bags, you can buy soy sauces and so on in their stores. So that's 12%. And then another 39% is apparel, so clothes. And then 47% is household, so the furniture. I guess stationery also fits into the household, but it's not broken down as another category in there. So that gives us some perspective of where they generated revenue and from which type of products. Another interesting point to now explore is, is this revenue growing, declining? Is it stable? And here is an interesting thing. So in 2020, before the COVID hit, because they have a different way of counting the financial years, so they made 440 billion yens. And then during the COVID, this fell down by 20%. And then in 2021, they had a very quick recovery. So the revenue was again 450 billion yens. And now in 2022, they are already at 500 billion yens, which is, as I said, roughly 3.3 million euros. So why is this interesting? Is because despite having this quite a big drop during the COVID, the company was pretty successful in just recovering pretty quickly. And now they had like a 10% growth year over year from 2021 to 2022. So what is growing? You know, why is the company growing, you may ask, and I have an answer for you. As we said before, these type of products, these type of companies rely heavily on the stores, you know, how many stores they open. And if you actually follow how many stores they opened between 2021 and 2022, you can see why there was the revenue growth. Because in 2021, the company had 1,002 stores, and in 2022, they had 1,072 stores. So that's a 7% increase, which kind of explains also why there is a 10% increase in revenue, is because you added almost 10% of new stores globally. And most of these new stores were opened still in Japan. So how is company actually doing from profitability perspective, you may ask? So, as I said before, revenue was 3.3 billion and operating profit was 220 million US dollars. So that gives us a profit margin of 6%. And I went and compared this with a couple of comparable brands. One is Uniqlo, which is also a Japanese brand. Let's just say that the story is different, but they're definitely big competitors in terms of Japanese heritage that tries to go and become a global brand. So they have a much healthier margin, 12% operating profit margin, and Lululemon has 16% operating profit margin. So it's hard to read too much into that, but it does seem to me as, trying to be the affordable luxury, trying to be the premium within the low cost is, from the perspective of margin, still a worse positioning than trying to be the differentiated or the premium provider in a space. What's the smirk about on your face, Franz? Tell me.
Maybe that's the problem.
What's the problem?
How business works.
Okay.
So that's exactly what I said, right? So every management book tells you don't be where Muji is.
Mm.
And now we just got the confirmation, which is sad if you like the values of what Muji stands for, right? And I think this is quite... I would argue that we would need more companies with a similar value proposition. But if you are shareholder driven, you're not going to go there because you rather go for 14, 20, 30% margin. I don't know if this is possible with these kind of products, but we are just learned that a very similar company has double the profit margin. Yeah, you usually don't go where Muji is if you are shareholder driven.
Yeah, if you're maximizing for shareholder value, then yeah, absolutely, it's not the play.
I would just say that there are examples of companies that follow similar principles, but because they have also very strong business fundamentals, they're just valued by investors very, very, very generously. So the fact that this company has only 6% operating profit doesn't mean it's a bad business. Not at all. It just tells you the reality of margins being higher elsewhere, but that does not need to equate with how valuable the company is, because there are companies, for example, Costco from the US, it's very, very famous for marking up their products only by, I believe, 16%. And that's unheard of. So usually when you go into a store, and it's the same for Muji, the price you see on the product, it's basically 50% of what the company has paid to acquire this product. So basically they just double their price. And Costco only applies 15% on top. But despite that, they are unbelievably well not positioned, but valued by the investors because they have such a strong moat. So I agree with you, Franz. I'm just trying to paint the story that this operating profit is not the full picture of this being attractive or not attractive business. It's more than that, but here's the kicker. The problem I see in their books is the following. There's a really, really important part of the annual report, which is called inventory turnover. So it's a KPI, very important for stores. And it basically tells us how frequently the inventory is changed within a store. Does it change twice a year? Does it change 5 times a year? Does it change 10 times a year, and so on? So we're going to play a game now, okay? And you're going to help me put these 3 companies on a list, basically how well they do in terms of the inventory turnover. So how frequently they actually sell off their inventory in a store. So there's 3 companies you're going to compare: Muji, Lululemon, and Costco. So I want your guess for which company has the highest inventory turnover, and which company has the lowest, and which one is in between. So we're actually comparing 3 different companies. One is food supplier, retailer, Costco, Lululemon with apparel, and then Muji that sells food, apparel, and furniture. So the guesses, please.
I think there is a natural winner. If you have perishable products, then obviously you have the biggest turnover, and that must be Costco.
Costco, until recently, was actually not in the business of perishable products. They actually moved. They recently added it, but for a long time they didn't want to have it. Yeah, just an additional note.
Yeah, they moved
But your logic.
very shelf stable stuff, but also shitloads of TVs and
Yes,
all that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
I think I'm with Franz. I would assume Costco, just because their lines change so often. Everyone knows that you might only get that product for a short space of time. Maybe not in the foodstuffs piece. So I'd have Costco as the biggest turnover.
If now I'm hearing that it's not that perishable, then I would maybe even put Lululemon first, because fast fashion. I mean, not so fast in other fashions, but still, fashion is short-lived. So I guess that turns also very quickly. But I'm just, to me, it just points towards Muji is doing the worst. If so, is not turning as fast. I don't know about Costco and Lululemon now.
Yeah. I mean, I also phrased it in a way. I framed it in a way that it was easy to guess that Muji is the worst, which it is. Actually, the surprise here is Costco, which is number one, which has inventory turnover of 12, more than 12.
What does that mean?
And the
So
reason
it's
this
replenished
is
12 times in a year? Is that what you mean?
I'm trying to go exactly there because it's super, super fascinating. So what it means that actually they actually succeed in selling everything they put into their stores in less than a month, because they have above 12 inventory turnover. And what usually happens is, if you have your own suppliers, you need to pay them in 30 days. And this means on average Costco needs 28 days to sell something off of their shelves, which means they don't need any outside financing, because the suppliers are financing them, because they don't need to pay them until the customer pays them, which is unbelievable for one reason, which is growth. But I'll get to this. Lululemon has an inventory turnover of 4. Just as a comparison, Zara has roughly 7, because it's just more in a fast fashion business. And Muji has an inventory turnover of only 2.22. That's pretty bad, especially if you're in business. I mean, it's not bad in itself, but it is a problematic if your whole strategy relies on opening new stores, because you need a very long time to actually repay the stock, the inventory you have in the store. So that's why it's problematic. So whenever you have a store, you really want to have a look at this inventory turnover KPI and understand this, and combine this with how the company is trying to grow. Is it opening a lot of stores? Is it because if it's franchising, then it's not such a big issue. But if it's opening your own stores, then it is an issue, because you need your own money to open those stores and finance the stock or inventory within those stores.
That's interesting. That is a new one to me. New KPI. Super interesting. Definitely going to be adding that into the research moving forward. Is that a side effect of having 7,000 very diverse products as well? Like, you're just not going to be, I don't know. It is a bit of a smorgasbord of stuff when you go into these stores. It's hard kind of not to know where to start. It's
a great question. But let's compare Muji to IKEA. I think this would be like I
was waiting for that.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you want to have low prices, then you're going to let your suppliers produce in bulk. If your product is stationary, obviously, again, that speaks for bulk production. So I'm still doubtful whether this is an actual bad number, because maybe it's just how this kind of a business works. As we said, perishable products will have by nature a different turnover than notebooks.
Exactly.
But I'm curious about IKEA now.
Yes. Okay. So IKEA has much fewer stores. It has 450, according to Statista. It has 9,500 products. So it has more products, fewer stores. And their inventory turnover is 3.5, which means it takes them roughly 105 days to sell a product. So it means Muji is like stretched thinner, much thinner than IKEA is.
2 point something, right, from Muji?
2.2 versus 3.5. 2.2 is basically means you need almost like 150, 60 days to sell a product off your shelves.
From purchase to not only from, is it only shelf or is it purchase, like you purchase it's in your ownership and then
It's in your
sold?
warehouse. It's
Okay.
from warehouse to selling. Warehouse or in store.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And problematic. Yeah.
Do we think that number
I mean,
would go down if they weren't so diverse in the number of products they sell? Is there an inverse relationship there normally?
It depends, again, on the type of product. It depends on what kind of business you're running, inventory-wise. It depends on a lot of different things. So it's hard to say. But yes, there is definitely connection with the type of product you're selling and the amount of products you're selling, because if you sell fewer products, you can optimize for that. But maybe they're stuck in the middle again because they have these products that sell really well, but it takes them a long time to sell. So obviously, from just the public information that we can acquire, it's hard to see the full story. But just seeing this number and understanding their strategy, which is retail presence, it is not the best combination, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn. I would love to know. I'm pretty sure there are conversations that happen at Muji that we could up the price of this product. We could simplify and not maybe cover all the bases for someone's life to make it simpler and nicer in some way. But I do wonder if they're just sticking to their guns. Like, you could definitely add 25-30% to the cost of a lot of their products, I think, given the quality of design. And yeah, they probably could cut out a whole bunch of products, but I don't know. I wonder if it's just the ethos and sticking maybe blindly, maybe unadvisedly to that is contributing maybe to these quite lean numbers.
Yeah, only they know at this stage. I couldn't find anything about it in the annual reports.
Yeah. But say we're having profit of 220 million.
222 million US dollars.
And that's the pitfall that also we need to be aware of, right? So there is always companies with different revenues, different profit margins, different gross margins. In the end, it needs to be a profitable company, right?
Yes.
Not every company can have ESOP 94% profit margin. Not everybody can have 80% software as a service profit margins. There need to be companies with profit margins of 7%. And if they're still making 222 million and are living for 45 years, 43 years, and hopefully continue to live that way and keep their, let's say, still strategic, unique position, that's all fine.
Totally.
No, I agree with this. It's just like they want to grow, and if you want to grow this type of business, it is problematic with this approach. But I agree that it is a long-lasting company. It's been profitable. So I have in front of me 11-year summary of their financials, and they've been profitable every single year, even during COVID, which is impressive to say the least. So it is stable, profitable company. My point is just that it's hard to grow with that combination of strategy and business model.
Totally, yeah. But fair play, Muji, keeping it profitable for all those periods. The thing that I did see, and again, I guess it's a challenge for growth, is that they will only have opened a store or go into a new market once they have gone absolutely down on their homework as far as store profitability, cost, availability of resources, making sure absolutely every box is ticked. So although, 7% very lean profit margin, you might think, Christ, that could really be at risk, if they make a bad move. They don't tend to make any bad moves, even though their growth is slow. They generally move into the right areas, having done an enormous amount of homework. So they can pretty much, it sounds like, on the whole, guarantee they're gonna make those numbers. Mm-hmm. There's been a few dips. Fran's already covered some of those, but maybe that's made them even more vigilant. But
let's have a look into the future, threats and opportunities. So, any volunteers? Or, I mean, I can also go first, but I think, Franz, you have this smile on your face as if you want to go into, I guess, threats or opportunities, or both.
No, I mean, I can, yeah.
Okay, good.
I think the threats are bound very much the business model and the industry. Like, it's the supply chain. If you're not, I mean, even if you produce yourself, you have supply chain issues, but especially when you don't produce yourself, then they're even bigger. Then what you just shared, the high cost of the brick and mortar stores versus online sales. I mean, they are very strong online. They are also very strong with a, I found very interesting app model. It's called the Passport. Not going to go too deep into it, but it feels like they were very early in the game and are using this very smartly, but still most of their sales are based on brick and mortar. Question, Alan, have you found online versus offline sales?
No.
Okay, I was interested in that, but
Did you? I didn't.
no, I didn't. I just found their online store good, proper, but still with so many shops.
I got it.
Mhm.
10%.
Online.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a risk. I mean, it's an opportunity, but at the same time, I mean, it's a low number, so it's an opportunity, but it's at the same time also a risk if you are so much dependent on brick and mortar stores with this cost structure and inventory turnover. Lastly, yeah, growth versus internationalization. So we have heard from you that their international sales are decent, but when it comes to the borders of Asia, they're not as good. So that's definitely, on the one hand, an opportunity, but at the same time also a threat if you're not like, yeah, it's heavy lifting. If you have a very specific story and strategy, how aggressive can you go into a new market? How much do you have to adjust and how much do you have to localize? But how much are you allowed to localize to not use this unique position? So I think this is also a very tricky situation for them. Obviously, there is a huge potential to grow outside of Asia, but at the same time, it seems very hard for them to actually materialize on that because it's, yeah, very narrow story. If you change, it's no story at all anymore. So yeah, so all of this is kind of threats, more threats, but I would say also an opportunity. Biggest opportunity, in my opinion, is again internationalization, because I think this just enough Spartan luxury is about to become the new luxury. So I think if they can stick to their guns and if they can tell the story, also especially in Europe, I think there is a market for this just enough simple approach that is bigger than 5% of their whole revenue, US and Europe combined.
Interesting. I think you've tapped into one of the things that I think has been is an opportunity, but also has been a threat to them for a long time. Is this absolute commitment to this sort of Japanese aesthetic and ethos, and we're very fashion led in the West, and it just hasn't. The visual, particularly in homewares and fashion, has just not been it for a little while now. I think there was a moment 10 years ago when Japandi was Japonica, that kind of look was far more.
Was that 10 years ago? I thought that's it now.
I don't know. I think I'm only talking in the UK at least. Like it's been very sort of, it's gone from Scandinavian stuff to like maximalist look and feel. I think personally in homewares for the last 10 years, and I think we are way more susceptible to cycles. Whereas in their home market, that is an aesthetic that's been around for hundreds of years, and they are just like a more accessible high street version of something that is so uniquely tied to the culture. So I just think they're going to probably be quite cyclical if they move into the West. So that's an opportunity when that arises again, but it's also a threat when that's not in fashion. And they are so sticking to their guns as far as their ethos and their aesthetic that I'm not sure it's always going to hit the right notes in the West from a design perspective. I think the threat that they've already had to deal with, particularly in the Far East, is counterfeits. They've had like Muji, people open like pretty much copycat Muji stores in China and have had to like take them to court to get them shut down. So I think that's been a big issue. They've lost, yeah.
I think they lost the
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
They lost the lawsuit, and now there's even more like knockoff brands.
Totally. So yeah, with anything sort of consumer high street level, there's always the risk of counterfeit, but there's also the risk of new market entrants that kind of do the same thing slightly differently. I think Tiger are an example, I think, of a brand that is, you know, quite high on design, or Flying Tiger, I think in some territories it's called. But again, very, very affordable, but people really have this kind of cult-like relationship with the brand that is kind of similar to what you see with Muji. So just another take on that sort of homewares lifestyle, big product range, low cost, but maybe with a flavour that kind of sits better in the West. So yeah, for me, those are the kind of mostly threats, I would say. I think I really admire them to staying true to their brand roots, and I think that would be the biggest threat if they decided to try and grow in other areas and sort of started to dilute that in some way. I think it would lose a lot of its cult-like appeal, and maybe be short-termist. But final bit is on the digital piece. I think the website, certainly the UK one, is not a great online experience personally. The Passport app is really interesting, and you said it's only 10% of revenue. I think a big part of that is they've historically had this strategy of it being a driver for in-store engagement, but there is untapped potential there to do more online. But I was looking at the UK website, I was like, damn, this needs user experience and the quality and even the simplicity. It doesn't really, for me, reflect the store experience terribly well. So yeah, more threats and opportunities on my plate.
Yeah, we seem to be all more heavily skewed towards the threats. Same on my side. So I think the fact that China is one of their fastest growing markets, at the same time, they just lost the lawsuit against the knockoff brands, is very, very problematic, to say the least. So if you count on China to be your growth engine, and it's also politically not as stable as some of the other Western economies in terms of the laws and so on. So yeah, that is a huge risk. Also, apparel sales look very shaky. So in 2020, they sold 187 billion. So let's say 190 billion yen of apparel. And in 2021, they sold only 170 billion. And now they're trying to kind of recover. So they had 180 billion in 2022. But it seems to be like the apparel is going down for them and trying to solve it, but it's not really their growth lever. And as we said before, apparel is 40% of their revenue. So maybe it's also the aesthetic of the apparel that is not most modern or whatever. So this is another risk. So this huge category of the revenue not performing as well. And for me, the biggest opportunity is online sales. So it's only 10% at the moment, and their plan for 2030 is for it to be 30%. So if they can pull off this new distribution channel, this could take off the pressure from what we discussed before with the growth through opening retail stores and needing to open new stores to grow. So that is definitely the biggest opportunity that they have. But I think they also need to find a way to unlock this Western market. Just don't know how. It's definitely a big opportunity. But I think their non-branding approach is kind of hindering them here. And it's something that they need to figure out And if they do, then they have a huge opportunity to also double and grow their presence in these markets. So if I would have to draw the line and say buy, sell, hold, by the way, it's a public company, so you can actually buy stocks. So we do have to say that this is not an investment advice. Everything we have talked about until now is just for entertainment and educational purposes only. And also this is just a game, and in this fashion, my answer to buy, sell, hold would be to hold. I don't think it's a great business I would be buying heavily into. I don't think it's a bad business that you would need to sell the stocks, but you can see there is longevity there with their like 40-year history, and they seem to know how to run this business, and there's enough of upside to actually hold and just see how things develop, because also currently the stock price is maybe even undervalued compared to some of their peers. So yeah, my decision would be to hold.
It's going to be unanimous, I think.
I would be holding.
About to say the same?
I think I was going to say the same. Like, this isn't going to give you some fucking 10x in the next 5 years, but safe pair of hands. It seems like they've been profitable for the longest time. You'd probably get a tidy little dividend each year, and you could probably be quite proud to hold some of their stock. I think you shouldn't maybe always bring your personal kind of element to making choices like this, but I can get behind them.
Emotional investment.
Yeah, not a sensible way
Best
of
advice
investing,
ever.
but a nice bonus.
Yeah.
How about you, Franz?
So
Same?
holding Muji. Same for you, Franz, right?
Definitely. But I might be buying stuff.
Hey, I'll buy
You
stock.
will be buying products.
Actual stock. Actual stock.
Nice,
I'd love to
nice.
know what people's favourite Muji products are in the comments, because like, doing a bit of stuff on YouTube, people do like these hauls where they go to buy a load of stuff, and there's this real cult-like kind of thing around them, especially when they launch new stuff. Tell us about some of those hidden gems that maybe we don't know about, and so that Franz can go and buy them all.
Exactly. Cool. So that's it in this episode. If you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to learn more about business topics relevant for designers, you can head over to d.mba/mini-MBA. So that is d.mba/mini-MBA. And there you can sign up for our 7-day mini MBA. So it's a free email course. And in 7 days, you receive 7 emails, each of them teaching you one business concept relevant for designers. And it's a nice little simple thing you can do to, gain more business confidence, apart from listening to these episodes, of course. Cool. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Franz. See you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.